The air in the courtroom was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and quiet desperation. All eyes were on the witness stand, on the young woman whose testimony was meant to be a minor procedural step in a billionaire's messy divorce. Her name was Sienna Miller, and she was the other woman. The judge asked her to read from a document, a simple financial ledger, to confirm the lavish gifts she'd received. But as her voice, initially confident, began to tremble, the words shifted. The numbers and dates gave way to a narrative, a story of calculated deceit and secret rendezvous. It was a story she knew intimately, yet had never read. A cold dread washed over her as she realized she wasn't reading a ledger. She was reading her own story written by the silent, watching wife. The first time the suspicion took root, it was over something as trivial as a scent. Not the cliched sillage of another woman's perfume clinging to a suit jacket, but the absence of one. Julian Croft. My husband of 12 years had always smelled the same. He smelled of money, yes, but also of a specific, ridiculously expensive cologne from a small Parisian perfumery, Santal Imperial. It was a scent I had chosen for him on our honeymoon in Paris, a rich, woody aroma that clung to the fibers of our lives. He smelled of it when he left for work in the morning, and he smelled of it when he returned at night, the fragrance a constant, reassuring presence in our sprawling Manhattan penthouse. But on that Tuesday evening in late October, he came home smelling of nothing. It was a sterile, clean scent, like the air of a hotel room or a freshly laundered shirt that wasn't his own. He kissed my cheek, the gesture as smooth and practiced as ever, but the familiar warmth of Santal Imperial was gone, replaced by a void. "Long day, darling," he murmured, loosening the silk tie of his Tom Ford suit. The board meeting was a killer. I smiled, the expression feeling like a mask I'd forgotten I was wearing. "Nothing a glass of Macallan 25 can't fix. I'll pour you one." As I walked to the crystal decanter that sat on our burled walnut bar, my mind raced. Julian was a man of routine, of impeccable habits. Forgetting his signature scent was as out of character as him wearing an off-the-rack suit. Our life was a masterpiece of curated perfection. Julian Croft wasn't just rich. He was a titan of industry, the CEO of Croft Holdings, a private equity firm, with its tentacles in everything from tech startups to luxury real estate. Our world was one of charity galas, where our donations were announced to thunderous applause of summers in the Hamptons and winters in St. Bart's of staff who anticipated our needs before we were aware of them ourselves. Our penthouse on the 78th floor of 157 was a monument to his success and my taste. It was a gilded cage, and I, Lara Croft, was its most prized inhabitant. I had been an art history major, with dreams of curating a museum when I met him. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of ambition and charm that swept me off my feet. He loved my quiet grace. He said my eye for beauty. He entrusted me with creating our world, and I had excelled. Every painting on the wall, every piece of furniture, every meticulously planned dinner party was my domain. I was the perfect wife for a man like Julian. But the absence of that scent was a hairline crack in the masterpiece, a single discordant note in a flawless symphony. Over the next few weeks, the cracks began to multiply. There were late-night meetings that stretched into the early hours of the morning, phone calls taken in hushed tones on the terrace, his back turned to me. A newfound obsession with his phone, which was suddenly guarded with a passcode he'd never used before. The old Julian, the man I married, had been an open book. His business dealings were aggressive, often ruthless. But with me, He had always been transparent. He would toss his phone onto the bedside table without a care, leaving it for me to plug in. Now it was his constant companion, a sleek black monolith that held secrets I was clearly not privy to. I tried to dismiss it. A man in his position was under immense pressure. Perhaps he was orchestrating a hostile takeover, a deal so sensitive that even I couldn't be brought into the circle of trust. I told myself this, repeated it like a mantra as I adjusted the silk flower arrangements and approved menus with our private chef. I played my part, smiled for the cameras at the opening of the new wing of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. A wing that bore the Croft name, and held his hand, all the while feeling a growing chasm between us. The confirmation came not with a bang, but with a quiet digital whisper. One Saturday afternoon, Julian was in the shower. His phone, which he had carelessly left on the marble countertop of his ensuite bathroom, buzzed. I was tidying up a habit from my more modest past that I had never quite shaken. The screen lit up with a notification from a name I didn't recognize, Sienna Miller. The message was brief, but it detonated my world. Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you. Same time next week, SX. My breath hitched. The air seemed to thin the opulent bathroom with its heated floors and rainfall shower suddenly feeling cold and suffocating. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I stared at the screen, the words burning themselves into my memory. Sienna. The name was soft, elegant. I imagined a woman who was everything I wasn't, younger, perhaps more carefree, someone who didn't carry the weight of the Croft dynasty on her shoulders. The sound of the water stopping jolted me back to reality. I placed the phone back exactly where I found it, my movements precise and deliberate. I retreated from the bathroom, my footsteps silent on the plush carpeting of our bedroom. I sat on the edge of our custom-made bed, the city lights twinkling below like a sea of indifferent stars, and I felt a profound, chilling clarity descend upon me. I could confront him. I could scream, cry throw the priceless Ming vase from its pedestal. I could pack my bags and walk out, initiating a divorce that would be the talk of New York society for months. The prenuptial agreement was ironclad, designed by Julian's formidable legal team. I would be comfortable, of course. I would be given a generous settlement, a new apartment, a life of quiet luxury. I would be another discarded wife of a wealthy man, a footnote in the epic saga of Julian Croft. And he would weather the storm. He would issue a joint statement about amicable separation. His PR team would spin a narrative of two people who had simply grown apart. He would be seen with Sienna Miller at some trendy restaurant a few months later, and the world would move on. He would lose a wife, but he would keep his empire, his reputation, his power, sitting there in the heart of the life I had so carefully built. A different emotion began to bubble up through the searing pain of betrayal. It was cold, hard, and utterly unfamiliar. It was rage. Not the hot, explosive kind, but a slow-burning, glacial fury. A simple divorce was not justice. It was a transaction. And what Julian had done was not a mere breach of contract. It was a desecration of our shared history of the woman I had been and the woman I had become for him. He wanted a secret life. I would let him have it. He wanted to deceive me. I would become a master of deception myself. He thought I was merely a beautiful object, a curator of his home. He had forgotten that a curator's job is not just to display art, but to understand its history, its value, and its weaknesses. In that moment, as the last rays of sunlight bled from the sky, I made a vow. I would not say a word. I would not shed a tear in his presence. I would play the part of the devoted, oblivious wife. And I would spend every waking moment gathering the threads of his secret life, not just to expose his affair, but to unravel the very fabric of the man he was. He had built an empire on calculated risks and hidden leverage. I would use his own tactics against him. This would not be a divorce. It would be a demolition. And I would be the one holding the detonator. A year. I would give myself 1 year. 1 year to learn everything, to plan everything, to become the author of his downfall. His Mistress Sienna was just the opening chapter. The story I was about to write would be read in a place where the truth, no matter how ugly, was the only currency that mattered. The days that followed my discovery were a masterclass in performance. I had always been an actress in a way, playing the role of Mrs. Julian Croft. Now I simply had a new, more complex character to inhabit the loving, unsuspecting wife. The shift was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it required a level of self-control I hadn't known I possessed. The first test came the very next morning. As we sat for breakfast on our sun-drenched terrace overlooking Central Park, Julian was unusually attentive. He complimented the raspberry danishes our chef had prepared, asked about my plans for the day, a meeting with the acquisitions committee at the Guggenheim, and commented on the crisp autumn air. He was laying the groundwork of normalcy, a path of smooth stones over the jagged reality of his deceit. I smiled, met his gaze across the white linen tablecloth, and played my part. "It's a beautiful day," I said, my voice even and warm. "Maybe we could open that bottle of Petrus 82 tonight, just the two of us." His eyes lit up. "Darling, that's a wonderful idea. A celebration." "A celebration of what?" I asked, my heart a block of ice in my chest. "Of us," he said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. His touch felt alien, a violation. "Of how good we have it." I held his gaze, a serene smile plastered on my face. Inside I was screaming. "How dare you? How dare you sit there and speak of us when you spent last night with another woman?" But on the outside I was Lara Croft, the epitome of grace. "To us," I echoed softly. That night we drank the Petrus. It tasted like ash in my mouth. As he swirled the deep red liquid in his glass, pontificating about its complex notes and its exceptional vintage, I studied him. I was no longer looking at my husband. I was looking at a subject. I observed the way his eyes shifted slightly when he lied, the almost imperceptible tightening of the muscles in his jaw. I noted the way he angled his body away from me, creating a subconscious barrier. He was a book, written in a language I had only just begun to decipher. My silent vow solidified into a concrete plan. My grief, which threatened to drown me in the lonely hours of the night, was channeled into a cold, methodical purpose. Confrontation was the weapon of the powerless. Information was the weapon of the powerful. Julian had taught me that, albeit indirectly, through years of listening to him dissect his business rivals. "Never attack the king directly," he once told me after a particularly brutal corporate takeover. "You bleed him slowly. You find his vulnerabilities, his hidden debts, his secret weaknesses. You make his own kingdom turn against him." I would become his greatest vulnerability. My first step was to understand the enemy. Not Julian, but Sienna Miller. Who was she? What did she do? Where did she come from? I needed to know what kind of woman had captivated my husband, what she offered him that I apparently did not. The digital breadcrumbs were my starting point. Her name was unique enough. A quick, discreet search on a new anonymous laptop I purchased for cash revealed she was an art consultant. The irony was so bitter, it almost made me laugh. Julian had traded an art historian for an art consultant. It seemed he had a type. Sienna had a public Instagram profile, a carefully curated gallery of her life. There she was, posing at Art Basel in Miami, clinking champagne glasses at a gallery opening in Chelsea, looking thoughtful in front of a Jeff Koons sculpture. She was beautiful in a modern, edgy way. Sharp cheekbones, a cascade of dark hair, and an air of ambitious hunger that radiated from every photo. She was 10 years my junior, a rising star in a world I knew intimately. I scrolled through her feed, my stomach churning. There were no pictures of Julian, of course. They were too smart for that. But there were clues. A shot of a luxurious hotel suite in Miami, with the caption "Work Perks." I cross-referenced the dates with Julian's calendar. He had been in Miami for a last-minute hedge fund conference. Another picture showed a close-up of a stunning diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist. "Some days are just better than others," the caption read. I recognized the distinct clasp design. It was from Graf Julian's preferred jeweler. I had a similar one, a gift for our 10th anniversary, locked away in my safe. My role as the perfect wife gave me unfettered access to our life, and by extension, his. I began to pay closer attention to the river of documents that flowed through our home office. Credit card statements, private jet manifests, expense reports. Julian had always been careless with them, leaving them on his desk for his assistant to file. He saw me as so far removed from the vulgarity of finance that it never occurred to him I would look, let alone understand. But I had spent 12 years listening to him. I had sat through countless dinners with his bankers, lawyers, and business partners. I had learned the language of mergers and acquisitions of shell corporations and offshore accounts as if by osmosis. What he had dismissed as my passive presence had been a decade-long education. I started discreetly photographing every document with a burner phone. The American Express Centurion card statement was a gold mine. There were charges for 5-star hotels in cities I knew he'd visited alone. Bouquets of flowers from a high-end florist I never used. Dinners at Daniel and Perse for 2. And then there were the gifts. A charge from a Chanel boutique for $8,000. A transaction at a lingerie store I wouldn't dare set foot in. A significant payment to a luxury car dealership in New Jersey. He wasn't just having an affair. He was bankrolling a whole new life for her. My money, our money, was being siphoned off to fund his betrayal. The rage I felt was so potent, it made me dizzy. But I pushed it down, compartmentalized it, and converted it into fuel. This was no longer just about infidelity. This was about assets. This was about the empire I had helped him build. One evening I took a calculated risk. Julian was on a call in his study. The heavy oak doors closed. I walked into his dressing room, a space larger than most New York apartments, and went to his suit rack. My fingers brushed past the familiar Zegna and Brioni fabrics. At the very back, behind his travel suits, was a garment bag I didn't recognize. It was from a bespoke tailor. I'd never heard of a small, discreet atelier in Soho. Inside was a suit I had never seen before. It was a beautiful modern cut, more adventurous than his usual conservative style. Tucked into the inside pocket was a small, sleek black phone. My heart pounded. This was it. The second phone. I knew I only had moments. My hands trembled as I tried to unlock it. I tried his birthday. No. Our anniversary? No. His mother's birthday? No. Then I had a flash of inspiration. I thought of Sienna Miller's hungry ambition, her modern edge. I thought of Julian's vanity. I typed in the stock ticker for Croft Holdings CRFT. It unlocked. My blood ran cold. The phone was a shrine to his secret life. There were hundreds of messages between him and Sienna, a running commentary of their affair. They were filled with explicit details, pet names, and promises of a future together. He told her he loved her. He told her I was a different part of his life, more of a business partner than a wife. He told her he felt truly alive only when he was with her. Each word was a fresh stab wound. I had to bite down on my knuckle to keep from crying out. I scrolled my mind a whirlwind of pain and fury, forcing myself to read, to absorb, to remember. But it was more than just love notes and illicit plans. There were business conversations here too, messages with contacts I didn't recognize, names connected to offshore entities, and cryptic discussions about Project Nightingale, a deal he had never once mentioned to me. It seemed this phone wasn't just for his mistress, it was for all his secrets. I photographed everything. The messages, the call logs, the contacts. I uploaded the photos to a secure encrypted cloud storage account, then deleted them from the burner phone. I placed the secret phone back in the suit pocket, zipped up the garment bag, and walked out of the dressing room. My face a calm, composed mask. When Julian finished his call and emerged from his study, he found me in the living room reading a book on Rothko. "Everything all right, darling?" he asked, pouring himself a drink. I looked up from my book, my expression serene. "Everything is perfect," I said, my voice steady. "I was just thinking how lucky I am." He smiled, genuinely pleased. "I'm the lucky one, Lara." As he sat down opposite me, I saw him not as my husband, but as a collection of assets and liabilities. His love for Sienna was a liability. His arrogance was a liability. His secret phone was a liability. And his assumption of my ignorance was his greatest liability of all. He thought he was in control. He thought he was the master of his universe. But his universe was about to contract into a very small, very dark space. My silent vow was no longer just a promise to myself. It was a detailed, multi-phase strategic plan. And Phase 1 reconnaissance was complete. The next 12 months were a study in duality. To the outside world and to Julian, I was a paragon of wifely devotion. I hosted his charity dinners, with effortless grace, my smile never faltering as he placed a proprietary hand on the small of my back. I redecorated our Hamptons estate, a project he praised as a testament to my impeccable taste. I even feigned enthusiasm when he suggested a trip to St. Moritz for New Year's, knowing full well he planned to extend his trip for a few days of solo skiing, a transparent euphemism for a rendezvous with Sienna. I played my part so perfectly that at times I felt a dizzying sense of detachment, as if I were watching a film of my own life. But in the quiet hours when Julian was away on his business trips or asleep in our bed, a different Lara emerged. This Lara was a creature of shadow and silence, a strategist fueled by cold fury. My weapon of choice was the burner laptop, my battlefield, the intricate labyrinthine world of Julian's finances. The information from his second phone, particularly the mention of Project Nightingale, had been the key to a door I never knew existed. It became clear that I couldn't do this alone. My knowledge of finance was that of an educated amateur. I needed a professional, someone who could navigate the murky waters of offshore banking and shell corporations without leaving a trace. I needed a ghost. My search led me to Marcus Thorne. He wasn't a typical forensic accountant you'd find on LinkedIn. A decade ago, Thorne had been a rising star at the SEC, a brilliant investigator who had taken down 2 major Wall Street figures. But his crusade had made him powerful enemies. A trumped-up ethics charge, later dismissed, but professionally fatal, had forced him out. Now he operated in the private sector, a discreet consultant for the ultra-wealthy who wanted to find skeletons in their partners' or rivals' closets. He was expensive, untraceable, and according to the whispers I heard, harbored a deep-seated loathing for men like Julian Croft. He was perfect. Our first meeting was in a quiet, dusty bookstore in the West Village that Thorne owned as a front. He was a small, unassuming man in his late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He listened patiently as I laid out what I had, withholding the source of the information, but providing the key details. Project Nightingale, the names of a few offshore entities I'd seen on the secret phone, and my suspicion that Julian's infidelity was a symptom of a much larger disease of deceit. Your husband's firm, Croft Holdings, is a private company. Thorne said, his voice a low rasp. Its financials are opaque. He likes it that way, but no one is completely invisible. Everyone leaves a trail. He quoted me a fee that would have made most people's eyes water. I didn't flinch. I had been quietly liquidating some of my own pre-marriage assets and art holdings, creating a war chest Julian knew nothing about. I don't just want to find the money he's hiding for our divorce, I said, my voice firm. I want to understand his entire operation. I want to know where every single dollar comes from and where it goes, especially Project Nightingale. Thorne gave me a long, searching look. This isn't about getting a better settlement, is it, Mrs. Croft? This is about justice, I replied, my voice cold. A slow, knowing smile spread across his face. I'll be in touch. While Thorne began his digital excavation, I embarked on a far more dangerous and psychologically taxing mission, getting close to Sienna Miller. It was a nauseating prospect, but a necessary one. I needed to understand her to see what Julian saw and to ensure she remained a fixture in his life. Her presence was a constant drain on his resources, and more importantly, a constant source of his carelessness. A man in the throes of a passionate affair makes mistakes. I needed him to keep making them. I orchestrated a chance encounter. Knowing from her Instagram that she was a regular at a particular high-end yoga studio in Soho, I joined. For weeks, I was just another face in the class, my mat positioned strategically where I could observe her. She was charismatic, laughing easily, with the instructor, her body toned and graceful. She radiated a confidence that I realized came not just from her youth and beauty, but from the security of being with a man like Julian Croft. The thought was a dagger to my heart. Finally, I made my move. In the locker room after class, I accidentally spilled my water bottle near her designer gym bag. "Oh my God, I am so sorry," I exclaimed, my voice filled with practiced panic. "Let me get that." She was gracious, waving it off. "It's fine, honestly. It's just water." "I'm Lara," I said, extending my hand, using only my first name. "Sienna," she replied, shaking it. Her grip was firm. "You're new here, right?" "Trying to be." I laughed, a self-deprecating sound I had perfected. My husband travels so much for work, I thought I should find a hobby to keep me from going stir-crazy in our apartment. That was the bait, the mention of a wealthy, traveling husband. Her eyes lit up with a flicker of shared experience. "I totally get that," she said, a conspiratorial tone in her voice. "The man in my life is the same, always on a plane." Over the next few months, I cultivated a fragile, cautious friendship with the woman who was sleeping with my husband. We would grab green juices after yoga. I listened, my heart pounding with a mixture of revulsion and fascination, as she spoke about her mysterious, powerful, and generous older boyfriend. She never named him, but the details she let slip: a recent trip to Tokyo, a passion for vintage Porsches, a home overlooking the park, all pointed to Julian. She complained about his wife. "She's apparently this perfect icy socialite," Sienna said one afternoon as we sat in a cafe. "He says it's more of a business arrangement. No passion. It's sad, really." I sipped my chamomile tea, my face a mask of sympathy. "That sounds difficult for him," I said, my voice betraying no emotion. "And for you." "It is," she sighed. "But he says it won't be forever. He's working on his exit strategy." This was the most painful part of my plan. Listening to this woman who I could have liked under different circumstances discuss the dismantling of my life, my marriage, with such casual entitlement. But every conversation was a data point. Every complaint she had about his unavailability, every hint she dropped about a future together, was another piece of the puzzle. I encouraged her. I told her she deserved to be happy, that a man who truly loved her would move heaven and earth for her. I was subtly reinforcing her belief that she was the endgame, ensuring she would continue to pressure Julian to keep him off balance. Meanwhile, Marcus Thorne was a phantom communicating only through encrypted messages. His findings were staggering. Project Nightingale wasn't just a deal. It was the crown jewel of Julian's duplicity. For years, Croft Holdings had been acquiring smaller tech companies using a series of offshore shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands and Panama. These weren't legitimate acquisitions. Julian would use his firm's capital to buy a company, then use creative accounting to strip its assets and intellectual property, transferring them to another shell company he secretly controlled. He would then bankrupt the original company, wiping out its other investors, while he sold the stolen IP for a massive untaxed profit. It was a sophisticated scheme of asset stripping and fraud on a grand scale. It was brilliant, audacious, and highly illegal. Thorne's investigation unearthed a web of deceit so complex it took my breath away. He found the secret bank accounts in Switzerland, the digital paper trail that connected Julian directly to the offshore entities. He discovered that Julian was preparing for the biggest deal of his life, selling the stolen IP from a dozen bankrupt companies to a massive tech conglomerate for a sum that would approach 10 figures. This was his exit strategy. He planned to cash out, leave Croft Holdings to deal with the fallout, and disappear into a new life with Sienna, his fortune laundered and secure. And my prearranged settlement would be a pittance paid out from a company that, once this deal was done, would be little more than a hollowed-out shell. He wasn't just planning on leaving me. He was planning on leaving me with the wreckage. The pieces clicked into place. The affair wasn't a midlife crisis. It was a distraction. Sienna, with her demands and her drama, was the perfect cover for his real betrayal. While I was supposed to be obsessing over his infidelity, he was orchestrating the financial crime of the century. My resolve hardened from steel to diamond. This was no longer just about a broken heart. It was about corporate malfeasance on a massive scale. It was about the countless employees and investors Julian had ruined along the way. My personal quest for justice had now aligned with a much larger one. As the one-year mark of my discovery approached, I had everything I needed. Thorne had compiled a dossier that was a work of art, a devastatingly precise map of Julian's criminal enterprise. I had my own collection of evidence, the credit card statements detailing his lavish spending on Sienna, the photographs of the secret phone's contents, and my own meticulously kept journal of my friendship with her, noting every detail she had unwittingly shared with me. The final step was to choose the battleground. A messy divorce court was one thing, but it wouldn't be enough. I needed a forum where the full scope of his crimes would be laid bare, where his public persona would be irrevocably shattered. I had Thorne package the Project Nightingale dossier anonymously. He sent one copy to a trusted contact at the Securities and Exchange Commission and another to the Southern District of New York's U.S. Attorney's Office. We timed it perfectly. The tip would land on their desks just days after my divorce lawyer, the formidable Eleanor Vance, filed my petition. The final piece of my year-long plan was in place. I had played the part of the spider, weaving a web of patience and deception. Julian, the arrogant fly, had been so busy buzzing around his pretty new flower that he had never even seen the strands. Now the web was complete, and it was time to pull. The day I filed for divorce, the world didn't end. The sky didn't fall. I served Julian the papers on a Tuesday morning, the same day of the week my world had first cracked. The gesture was a small, private satisfaction. I didn't have them delivered by a process server to his gleaming office tower. That would have been too theatrical, too cliché. Instead, I left the thick envelope on his side of the bed, placed neatly on his pillow, before I left for the day. I spent the morning at the Frick, losing myself in the quiet contemplation of Holbein and Vermeer. My phone turned off. When I returned, the penthouse was vibrating with a furious energy. Julian was pacing the living room like a caged tiger, his face a mask of thunderous disbelief. The envelope was torn open on the coffee table. "What the hell is this, Lara?" he roared, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. I met his gaze, my expression calm, almost placid. The mask of the oblivious wife was gone, replaced by a quiet, unyielding composure. "It's a petition for divorce, Julian. I believe it's self-explanatory. After 12 years, with no warning, no discussion, you just leave this on my pillow." He was incredulous, as if I had violated some sacred rule of marital decorum. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I felt it was the most direct approach, I said, setting my purse down on a console table. "You've been a great admirer of efficiency in business. I assumed you'd appreciate it in personal matters as well. This is insane. We have a perfect life." "No, Julian," I said, my voice dropping, losing its socialite lilt and finding a new steely resonance. "You have a perfect life. I have a gilded cage, and I've decided I want to be free." He stared at me, truly seeing me for the first time in years. He wasn't seeing the graceful hostess or the decorative wife. He was seeing a stranger, and it terrified him. The argument that followed was explosive, but I remained detached, an observer to his meltdown. He accused, he threatened, he cajoled. He even, in a moment of stunning audacity, tried to gaslight me, suggesting I was menopausal or bored or having a breakdown. I let him exhaust himself. When he was finally spent, breathing heavily, and staring at me with a mixture of hatred and confusion, I said simply, "My lawyer is Eleanor Vance. Your lawyers can speak to her." Mentioning Eleanor's name was like throwing a bucket of ice water on him. Eleanor Vance was not the kind of lawyer you hired for an amicable society divorce. She was a shark, a legendary litigator known for eviscerating powerful men on the witness stand. Hiring her was a declaration of war. In the weeks that followed, Julian's strategy became clear. His legal team, a phalanx of expensive suits from a top-tier firm, tried to paint me as an unstable, vindictive woman, scorned and seeking a payout far beyond our prenup. They argued that the marriage had been a partnership, and while it was ending, Julian's business, Croft Holdings, was his alone. They prepared to fight me on every front. Simultaneously, and unbeknownst to them, the anonymous tip from Marcus Thorne was working its way through the federal system. The SEC launched a quiet inquiry into Croft Holdings. The U.S. Attorney's Office began sniffing around the edges of Project Nightingale. The two legal storms were gathering on separate horizons, and Julian, blinded by the hubris of his impending divorce battle, had no idea they were about to merge into a Category 5 hurricane directly over his head. The preliminary divorce hearings were held in a closed courtroom, a concession to Julian's high-profile status. His lawyers focused their attack on my claim for a greater share of the marital assets. Their argument was that my contribution to his wealth was negligible. I was a homemaker, a socialite. They intended to portray me as a kept woman who was now getting greedy. To counter this, they made a critical mistake. They decided to address the issue of Julian's infidelity head-on, but to frame it as a minor, insignificant dalliance. Their plan was to downplay its emotional and, crucially, its financial impact. To do this, they decided to call Sienna Miller as a witness. I knew they would. I had counted on it. In my conversations with her, I had subtly planted the idea that if the divorce ever happened, she should be prepared to testify. "You need to protect yourself," I'd told her in my guise as her concerned friend, Lara. "Make sure his lawyers know how much he values you." It was a move of pure psychological manipulation, and she had fallen for it, completely believing she was acting in her own self-interest. The day Sienna walked into the courtroom, she looked every bit the part of the sophisticated art consultant. She wore a chic, understated dress, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She avoided my gaze, but I could feel her nervous energy from across the room. She was here to do her part for the man she loved, the man who had promised her a future. She believed her testimony would be a small, controlled part of his legal strategy. Julian's lead counsel, a slick lawyer named Robert Harrington, handled her with kid gloves. He led her through a series of gentle questions, establishing that she and Julian had a close personal relationship, and that any gifts she had received were tokens of affection, not a significant drain on the Croft fortune. "Ms. Miller," Harrington said, "it's been suggested that Mr. Croft was funding an extravagant lifestyle for you. Would you say that's accurate?" "No, not at all," Sienna said, her voice clear. "Julian was very generous, but I have my own successful career. His gifts were just that, gifts." Harrington smiled. "Thank you, Ms. Miller. No further questions." Now it was Eleanor Vance's turn. She rose slowly, a formidable presence in her dark, perfectly tailored suit. She approached the witness stand, not with aggression, but with an air of quiet curiosity. "Good afternoon, Miss Miller." Eleanor began, her voice calm and measured. "I just have a few things I'd like to clarify. You've testified that the gifts from Mr. Croft were not extravagant. I imagine terms like extravagant can be subjective. So perhaps we can deal in specifics." Eleanor walked to her table and picked up a thick, leather-bound binder. It was my work, my year of silent, meticulous documentation. She placed it on the witness stand in front of Sienna. "This is a ledger, Miss Miller," Eleanor said, "compiled from Mr. Croft's financial records. It details certain expenditures made over the past 18 months. I'd like you to read a few entries for the court just to confirm their accuracy. Let's start with page 1, shall we? The entry for April 12th of last year. Sienna's brow furrowed slightly. She looked at Julian's lawyer, who gave her a reassuring nod. She was just confirming facts. Simple. She cleared her throat and began to read. April 12th. Wire transfer to a leasing agent for the down payment and first 6 months' rent on a one-bedroom apartment at 111 West 57th Street. Total $150,000. Her voice faltered for a moment. Her own apartment. Stated so baldly it sounded less like a gift and more like a transaction. Please continue, Miss Miller, Eleanor said gently. The next entry. May 3rd. May 3rd. Sienna read her voice a little smaller now. Graph diamonds. Purchase of 1 platinum and diamond tennis bracelet. $72,000. Is that the bracelet you're wearing today? Eleanor asked conversationally. Sienna instinctively touched her wrist. Yes. Beautiful. Please go on. Let's skip ahead to page 10. The entry for August 21st. Sienna turned the page. Her eyes scanned the entry, and a flicker of confusion crossed her face. The formatting was different. The dry, ledger-like entries were interspersed with narrative text. She began to read, her voice hesitant. August 21st. Purchase of 2 first-class round-trip tickets to Tokyo on Japan Airlines. $34,600. The trip was a surprise. Julian told me he needed to go for a meeting with investors from SoftBank. He told his wife the same thing. Sienna stopped. She looked up at Eleanor, then at the judge, her eyes wide with alarm. I'm not sure what this is. It's a record, Ms. Miller, Eleanor said, her voice still unnervingly calm. Just keep reading. The entry for August 22nd. Sienna's hands were trembling now. She looked at Julian, a desperate, pleading look in her eyes. Julian was bolt upright in his chair, his face pale, whispering furiously to his lawyer. Harrington stood up. Objection. Your Honor. What is this document counsel is badgering the witness with? With a novel? It's a financial ledger, Your Honor, supported by receipts and bank statements, all of which have been submitted as evidence, Eleanor countered smoothly. I'm simply asking the witness to confirm the expenditures. The additional context is for clarity. The judge, a stern, experienced woman named Judge Diaz, leaned forward, intrigued. The context seems unusually detailed, Ms. Vance, but the witness is being asked to verify financial transactions she was a party to. Objection overruled. Please continue, Ms. Miller. Read the entry. Sienna's face was ashen. She knew she had no choice. She looked back down at the page at the story of her own life, written by an unseen hand. Her voice was barely a whisper now, the courtroom hanging on every word. August 22nd. We stayed at the Park Hyatt. He had booked the presidential suite. He told me he loved me for the first time that night after we drank a bottle of sake that cost more than my first car. He said his marriage was a prison and I was his only hope for escape. He said his wife Lara didn't understand him, that she was cold and passionless, more interested in art than in him. A collective gasp went through the small audience of lawyers and clerks. Sienna looked up from the page, her eyes locking with mine for the first time. The dawning horror on her face was terrible and absolute. The blood drained from her cheeks as the truth hit her with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a ledger. This wasn't Julian's story. This was my story. The words she was reading, the intimate details of her affair, the secret promises, the lies he had told her about me. They were all laid out, not from his perspective, but from the perspective of the woman who had been silently watching, listening and recording everything. She was not a witness in his defense. She was the star witness for my prosecution, the narrator of her own part in my husband's grand betrayal. She looked down at the binder, then back at me, her mouth opening and closing silently. She finally understood. She wasn't his partner in a secret love affair. She was just Exhibit A in my case against him. And she had just read her own indictment into the court record. The courtroom, which had been simmering with tension, fell into a state of stunned silence. The only sound was the rustle of paper as Sienna Miller's trembling hands struggled to hold the binder. The words she had just read hung in the air, a devastating testament to Julian's duplicity made all the more powerful because it had come from his mistress's own mouth. Sienna looked at me, her eyes filled with a maelstrom of emotions, confusion, betrayal, humiliation, and a dawning, horrified respect. In that one shared glance, the secret war I had waged for a year was finally declared. The carefully constructed artifice of her life, her love affair, her promised future, had been shattered by the story she herself had been forced to tell. Judge Diaz, her face grim, looked from Sienna to a sputtering Robert Harrington, then to Julian, whose face had gone from pale to a ghastly shade of grey. "Miss Vance," the judge said, her voice cutting through the silence, "I believe I have seen enough for one day. We will adjourn until tomorrow morning at 10. The gavel strike sounded like a gunshot. Sienna stumbled from the witness stand, her composure utterly broken. She didn't look at Julian. She fled the courtroom, a whirlwind of shame and exposed secrets. Julian shot to his feet, his eyes blazing with a murderous rage I had never seen before. He lunged towards my table, his lawyers grabbing his arms to restrain him. "You!" He seethed, his voice a guttural roar that was quickly silenced by court officers. "You will pay for this, Lara." I met his fury with an unnerving calm. I simply stood, gathered my things, and walked out of the courtroom beside Eleanor, my head held high. The war was not over, but the decisive battle had just been won. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Julian. The story of the courtroom drama leaked to the press as I knew it would. The billionaire's ledger, the tabloids called it, recounting with salacious detail how Julian Croft's mistress was made to read his wife's narrative of their affair in open court. The story was a sensation, not just because of the salacious details, but because of the calculated, cold-blooded brilliance of the strategy. I was no longer the scorned wife. I was a Machiavellian mastermind. This public humiliation, however, was merely the opening salvo. The real devastation was happening behind the scenes. The SEC and the U.S. Attorney's Office, their interest piqued by the now very public and very messy implosion of Julian Croft's life, accelerated their investigation into Project Nightingale. The anonymous tip, which had been slowly working its way through the bureaucracy, was now a top priority. Federal investigators began issuing subpoenas, raiding the offices of Croft Holdings and seizing servers. Julian was fighting a war on two fronts, and he was hemorrhaging resources, credibility, and time. His high-powered divorce lawyers were suddenly dealing with a client who was also a person of interest in a massive federal fraud investigation. Their strategy of painting me as a greedy, emotional woman was in tatters. Eleanor Vance used the momentum to her full advantage. She filed a motion to have Julian's assets frozen, arguing that the evidence of his extensive financial deception, as detailed in the Project Nightingale dossier, that she now, coincidentally, also had a copy of, proved he was a flight risk and was actively hiding marital assets in a complex web of illegal offshore accounts. Judge Diaz, having witnessed Julian's duplicity first-hand in her courtroom, granted the motion. Suddenly, Julian Croft, a man who could move markets with a phone call, couldn't access his own fortune. His credit cards were declined. His private jet was grounded. He was trapped. His empire began to crumble with astonishing speed. News of the federal investigation caused his firm's lenders to panic. Lines of credit were pulled. Investors, spooked by the fraud allegations, demanded their money back. Croft Holdings, which had seemed like an invincible titan, was revealed to be a house of cards, built on a foundation of lies. The very structure of his wealth, designed to be impenetrable, became his prison. Sienna Miller disappeared. Her Instagram was deleted. Her phone disconnected. She had been publicly sacrificed a pawn in a game she never even knew she was playing. I felt a sliver of pity for her. She was a casualty, another woman undone by Julian's pathological narcissism. But my pity was overshadowed by the grim necessity of what I had done. She had willingly participated in the attempted destruction of my life. I had simply turned the mirror back on her. The divorce proceedings became a footnote to the larger criminal case. Faced with irrefutable evidence from Marcus Thorne's investigation, wire transfers, encrypted emails, and the testimony of several former employees who had been granted immunity, Julian's legal team saw the writing on the wall. They approached Eleanor for a settlement. It was a complete and utter capitulation. I didn't want his blood money, the profits from his crimes. Eleanor, guided by my instructions and Thorne's forensic accounting, crafted a settlement that was surgical in its precision. I would receive all of our shared legitimate assets, the penthouse, the Hamptons estate, the art collection, and a significant portion of his verifiable pre-fraud investment portfolio. It was a fortune by any standard, but more importantly, it was clean. The rest, the vast illicit wealth accumulated through Project Nightingale, was left in the frozen accounts ready to be seized by the government for restitution to his victims, the investors and employees he had defrauded. The day we signed the papers was grey and rainy. We met in a sterile conference room at Eleanor's firm. Julian looked like a ghost. He was gaunt, his expensive suit hanging off his diminished frame. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. He didn't speak to me. He just signed the documents, his signature, a weak, spidery scrawl, a pale imitation of his once bold handwriting. As he was leaving, I spoke his name. "Julian." He stopped, his back to me. "I want you to know something," I said, my voice clear and steady. "The year I spent in silence watching you was the most honest year of our marriage. Because for the first time, I saw you for exactly who you are." He flinched as if struck. Then, without turning around, he walked out of the room, out of the building, and out of my life, on his way to face the justice system he had so arrogantly believed he was above. A few months later, Julian Croft pleaded guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. The media frenzy was intense, but I remained silent, refusing all interviews. My story had been told where it mattered in court. I sold the penthouse. It held too many ghosts. I kept the art, the beautiful things that had been my only true companions during my marriage. I established a foundation using a significant portion of the settlement to provide legal aid and forensic accounting services to women in complex, abusive divorces. I called it the Nightingale Foundation. It was a final, quiet act of reclamation, turning the name of his greatest crime into a symbol of hope and justice for others. I had not just survived. I had rewritten my own ending on my own terms. The gilded cage was gone, and in its place was a wide-open sky. The story of Lara Croft isn't just a tale of revenge. It's a testament to the quiet strength that can be forged in the fires of betrayal. It shows that the deepest wounds can become the source of the greatest power. She didn't just expose a cheating husband. She dismantled an empire of deceit, using the very tools of intelligence and strategy that her husband so arrogantly thought belonged only to him. Her year of silence wasn't a year of weakness. It was a year of sharpening her sword. In the end, it wasn't a screaming match that brought him down, but a meticulously documented story, read in the one place where the truth, no matter how inconvenient, holds ultimate power. What did you think of Lara's calculated plan? Was her form of justice deserved? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of resilience and ultimate triumph, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more true-life stories of drama survival and justice. Mark Ellison believed this dinner was his golden ticket. He was a man on the rise, his world defined by spreadsheets and stock tickers, and the exclusive La Sfera d'Oro was the ultimate symbol of his arrival. His wife Helen was just a simple, quiet accessory he dragged along an embarrassment he had to tolerate. But as he sat under the crystal chandeliers, fueled by expensive wine and a desperate need to impress, he unleashed a torrent of cruel public insults. He failed to notice the man watching from the shadows. Mark was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, because that man, the legendary owner of the entire restaurant empire, was about to call Mark's wife daughter. The Thursday of the dinner began like any other day in the meticulously curated beige and grey apartment of Mark and Helen Ellison. Mark, a man who at 34 was already losing his hair, but compensated with viciously expensive razor-sharp suits, stood at the marble kitchen island. He wasn't drinking his coffee. He was critiquing it. "Helen, this is mud," he said, pushing the porcelain mug away. "The grinder settings are clearly off. I've told you a burr grinder needs consistent calibration. It's not a toy." Helen, dressed in a simple grey knit sweater that seemed to drain the colour from her face, said nothing. She merely took the mug, her movements economical and silent, and poured the $40 a pound coffee down the drain. She had become a creature of silence. In the 5 years they had been married, her world had contracted to the dimensions of this apartment, to the precise, exacting, and suffocating standards of her husband. Mark worked as a junior portfolio manager at Sterling Price Capital, a firm with a name like polished granite. He was good at his job, but he wasn't exceptional. He wasn't the Ivy League old money type that glided effortlessly up the corporate ladder. He was a grinder, a striver, a man perpetually terrified of being exposed as the middle-class Ohio native he was. He saw status as a zero-sum game, and to ensure his own rise, he had to push someone else down. The closest and safest target was always Helen. He had met her at a small cafe, the Daily Grind, where she was sketching in a notebook. She had seemed simple. Her clothes were unremarkable, her demeanor gentle and unassuming. She was beautiful in a quiet, forgettable way, or so he'd thought. She was the perfect blank canvas onto which he could project the image of a successful man. He had rescued her from what he assumed was a life of aimless bohemian poverty. He gave her this apartment, he paid for her clothes, which he picked out, and in return he expected flawless, silent adoration. What he received instead was a quiet, unshakable melancholy that he found profoundly irritating. "You are going to be ready at 7 o'clock sharp," he commanded, pulling on his trench coat. "Not 7:01, not 7:02. 7. The reservation at La Sfera d'Oro is at 8, and I will not be late because you couldn't manage a simple timeline." Helen finally looked up. Her eyes, a deep, startling shade of amber, held a flicker of something. Fear. "Mark, it's just, that place is so expensive. Are you sure we could just go to Luigi's?" Mark let out a sound of pure disgust. "Luigi's, that red-checked tablecloth slop house." "Helen, this is not one of your little animal shelter fundraisers. This is La Sfera d'Oro. I just closed the Henderson account. I deserve to be there. And as my wife, you will be there, and you will not embarrass me. Wear the black dress, the one I bought you. Not whatever that shapeless sack is." He gestured to her sweater, and without waiting for a reply, he was out the door, the deadbolt clicking shut with a sound of finality. Helen stood in the kitchen for a long time. The silence of the apartment was a living thing, heavy and cold. She went to the closet and pulled out the dress. It was a severe black sheath by a designer Mark admired. It was expensive, beautifully made, and she hated it. It felt like a uniform. She looked at her reflection. The woman staring back was a ghost. Where had she gone? The girl who loved to paint, who laughed loudly, who spoke 3 languages. She had vanished, eroded day by day by Mark's relentless acid-drip condescension. He thought her family was poor, maybe farmers from the Midwest. He'd mocked her simple background dozens of times. "You just don't understand these things, Helen," he would say. "It's not your fault. You weren't raised with it." She had never corrected him. She had let him believe the lie. She had met him during her great escape, her attempt to live a normal life, anonymous and free from the crushing weight of her family name. She had wanted just once to be loved for who she was, not for what she was. She had found Mark, and in her desperate search for normal, she had stumbled into something far, far worse than the gilded cage she'd fled. That evening she applied her makeup with the precision of a soldier. She put on the black dress. She styled her dark hair exactly as he preferred. It pulled back in a severe, joyless chignon. When the clock read 6:59 p.m., she was standing by the door, her simple cloth coat in hand, her face a mask of placid obedience. When Mark arrived, he gave her a critical once-over. "Fine," he clipped. "You'll do. Now, for God's sake, Helen, remember the rules. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't order for yourself. I'll handle it. And whatever you do, don't try to be interesting. Just smile and nod. Can you manage that?" "Yes, Mark," she whispered. "Good." He grabbed his keys. "Let's go. I'm not about to lose a table at La Sfera because you were daydreaming about stray cats." As they stepped into the elevator, Helen's stomach twisted. It wasn't the restaurant that scared her. She had grown up in places like La Sfera d'Oro. She wasn't scared of the cost, or the waiters, or the wine list. She was scared because La Sfera d'Oro, the Golden Sphere, was her father's flagship. It was the crown jewel of the Romano Hospitality Group. And she hadn't spoken to her father, Antonio Romano, in 5 years. The drive to the restaurant was a symphony of Mark's anxieties played out as a series of aggressive lane changes and muttered curses. He honked at a taxi that lingered too long at a yellow light. "Move, you peasant. Don't you know what a turn signal is?" He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel of his leased BMW, a muscle in his jaw twitching. "Did you review the file I sent you?" he snapped. Helen, startled from her own anxious thoughts, blinked. "What file?" "The file, Helen." The one on the Harrisons, Richard Harrison, CEO of Apex Logistics. His wife, Catherine. I told you they always dine at La Sfera on Thursdays. This isn't just a celebration, it's an opportunity. If I can get 5 minutes with Harrison, just plant the seed. It could be huge. I must have missed it, Mark. I was at the shelter all day. We had a new intake. I don't care. He cut her off, his voice flat and cold. I simply don't care about the mangy animals. I'm trying to build an empire, and you're busy wiping noses. Just be quiet. I need to focus. Helen turned her head to the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of neon. The empire Mark was building was built on a foundation of debt and desperation. She knew because she managed their finances, a task he'd dumped on her, calling it simple housekeeping. She knew about the maxed-out credit cards, the secret loan he'd taken to cover a bad market bet. This dinner wasn't a celebration. It was a performance, a desperate gamble. They pulled up to the restaurant. La Sfera d'Oro was not flashy. It was old-world, discreet, and terrifyingly powerful. It was a converted 19th-century bank, all granite columns and massive bronze doors. There was no neon sign, just a small, burnished gold plaque that read, Romano. A valet dressed in a sharp black uniform opened Helen's door before Mark had even put the car in park. "Good evening, madame." Mark practically threw his keys at another valet. "Be careful with it. It's a 5 Series. The valet just smiled, a polite, empty smile that had seen 1,000 insecure men in leased BMWs. They walked through the bronze doors into a hushed lobby. The air itself felt different, thick with the scent of old money beeswax and a faint, complex aroma of truffles and wine. The sound was muffled, a civilized hum of quiet conversation and the distant melodic clink of heavy silver on fine porcelain. The maitre d', a tall, impossibly elegant man in a velvet smoking jacket, stood behind a century-old mahogany podium. His name was Jean-Pierre, and Helen had known him since she was a child. He used to sneak her marzipan fruits from the kitchen. He looked up as they approached. His eyes, professionally blank, swept over Mark, cataloguing his suit, his watch, his nervous energy. Then his eyes landed on Helen. For a single agonizing second, the mask of the perfect maitre d' shattered. His eyes widened. A micro-expression of shock recognition and profound confusion passed over his face. He almost said her name. Helen could see the E form on his lips. She gave him the tiniest, almost imperceptible shake of her head. A desperate, silent plea. Jean-Pierre, a consummate professional, recovered in an instant. The mask was back, welded in place, but his voice when he spoke was a fraction too stiff. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "Ellison," Mark said, puffing his chest out. "Mark Ellison. For 2. 8 o'clock." "Of course, Mr. Ellison." Jean-Pierre did not consult his book. He knew every reservation. "This way, please." He led them through the main dining room. It was magnificent. A 3-tiered crystal chandelier, rumored to have been taken from a Venetian palace, hung from a soaring, frescoed ceiling. Tables were spaced far apart, creating islands of privacy. The other diners were a mix of old money families in quiet tweed and pearls and new money tech billionaires in $5,000, quiet luxury sweaters. Mark was practically vibrating. He spotted his target. "There they are," he hissed, grabbing Helen's elbow. "The Harrisons. We're 2 tables away. Perfect." As they were seated, Helen felt a presence. She looked toward a shadowed alcove near the kitchen entrance. A man was standing there, his hands clasped behind his back, observing the room. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair, a face that looked carved from Italian marble, and eyes as dark and sharp as obsidian. He wore a Brioni suit so perfectly tailored it seemed a part of him. It was her father, Antonio Romano. Their eyes met across the expanse of the dining room. Helen's heart stopped. She felt the blood drain from her face. Her father's expression was unreadable, a block of stone. He hadn't seen her in 5 years, not since the day she'd walked out of his life, leaving a note on her pillow. She quickly dropped her gaze, her hands trembling in her lap. "What's wrong with you?" Mark hissed, opening his menu. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Don't be so provincial, Helen. Try to act like you belong." Helen couldn't speak. She just picked up her water glass, the heavy crystal cold against her trembling fingers. Her father was here. He was watching. And her husband was a ticking time bomb. This night, she realized, was not just going to be bad. It was going to be a catastrophe. The dinner began. It was less a meal and more a trial. A young waiter, nervous and starstruck, poured their water. Mark waved him away, as if he were a fly. "We'll have the San Pellegrino, the large bottle, and I'll need to see the sommelier." When the sommelier, a prim French woman named Corinne, arrived with the leather-bound wine list Mark put on a show. He swirled his empty glass, sniffed it, and then held the list up to the light, as if he were deciphering an ancient text. "I'm looking for something robust," he announced, his voice a little too loud. "A Bordeaux. Perhaps the, Chateau Pavie." He horribly mispronounced Pavie. Corinne the sommelier gave a polite, tight-lipped smile. "An excellent choice, monsieur. The Chateau Pavie is a remarkable Saint-Emilion. Very bold." She pointed. "We have the 2005. It is $2,400. Mark's blood ran cold. He had been pointing at a $240 bottle on the previous page. He tried to recover a red flush creeping up his neck. "Ah, yes. A bit young, don't you think I'll have the Malbec, the Cahors from Argentina?" "As you wish, monsieur," Corinne said, gliding away. Helen knew what Mark had done. He had tried to order a famous French wine, panicked at the price, and defaulted to a Malbec from Cahors, France, but called it Argentina to sound worldly, accidentally mixing up his regions. It was a small, clumsy mistake, but in a place like this it was a social gunshot. Mark, furious at his own error and the sommelier's polite correction, turned his simmering rage onto the only safe target he had. "This," he said, gesturing with his fork, "is what real class is, Helen. Not that cheap, sticky-floored diner you're so fond of. People here understand quality. They understand worth." Helen stayed silent, her eyes fixed on her bread plate. "Are you even listening to me?" he demanded, his voice a low hiss. "Look at you. You're sulking. We are in the finest restaurant in the city, an establishment you could never have dreamed of entering, and you're sulking." "I'm not sulking, Mark. I'm just taking it in." "Taking it in. You look like a lost puppy. Straighten your back. For God's sake, at least pretend you have some breeding." From the corner of her eye, Helen saw him. Her father. He was no longer in the alcove. He was circulating, moving from table to table, a quiet word here, a nod there. He was the conductor of this magnificent orchestra. He hadn't come near their table, but Helen felt his presence like a change in the atmospheric pressure. He knew she was here. He was watching. He was waiting. The first course arrived, a delicate, seared scallop on a bed of parsnip puree. Mark devoured his in 2 bites. Helen, her appetite gone, picked at hers. "What's wrong? Is the food too complicated for you?" Mark sneered. "I'm sorry they don't have chicken nuggets. You can't just nibble, Helen. You look weak. It's unattractive." He refilled his wine glass. The alcohol was loosening his already thin filter. He looked over at the Harrisons' table. Richard Harrison, the CEO, was laughing at something his wife said. This was Mark's moment. "I'm going to go. Pay my respects," he said, standing up and adjusting his tie. "Mark, don't," Helen whispered, a genuine plea. "They're in the middle of their meal. It's not the time." "What would you know about the time?" he snapped. "What would you know about networking, about ambition? Your biggest ambition for the day is deciding which sad-eyed dog to pet. You stay here, and try not to spill anything." He walked over to the Harrisons' table. Helen watched in horror. It was a car crash in slow motion. Mark was too loud. His gestures were too broad. She saw Richard Harrison's polite smile become fixed, then strained. Mark was trying to give him a business card. Catherine Harrison, his wife, was looking at Mark with open, undisguised annoyance. After a brutal 2-minute monologue from Mark, Richard Harrison finally clapped him on the shoulder in a clear gesture of dismissal. Mark returned to the table, his face a mask of thunder. He was humiliated. He had been brushed off. He said he's not interested in new portfolios right now. Mark mumbled, slumping into his chair. "It's okay, Mark," Helen said softly, trying to soothe him. He was with his wife." "Don't," Mark seethed. "Don't you dare. It's okay, Mark, me. This is your fault." "My fault how?" Your energy," he spat, searching for a target. "Your negative, mousy, poor energy. It's dragging me down. I'm sitting here trying to make us a better life, and I'm shackled to a woman who probably thinks escargot is a type of car." The main courses arrived. Mark had ordered the $150 Wagyu steak. Helen, a vegetarian, had the risotto. Mark took a bite of his steak. "Incredible." He sighed, his mood shifting slightly. He looked at Helen's plate. "Risotto. Rice and mushrooms. How pathetic." "It's peasant food, Helen. You can take the girl out of the trailer park, but you can't, as they say." He was getting louder. The couple at the table next to them, an older pair, glanced over with disapproval. This was it, the main event, the crescendo of his humiliation. He had failed to impress the Harrisons. He had been subtly insulted by the sommelier, and now he needed to re-establish his dominance. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, cruel whisper that was paradoxically loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "You know, Helen, I've tried. I really have. I tried to polish you up. I bought you clothes, I taught you which fork to use. But you're just hopeless." Helen's eyes filled with tears. "Mark, please. Stop it. You're drunk." "I'm not drunk," he declared, his voice rising to a sharp bark. "I'm enlightened. I'm sitting here looking at you, and I'm finally realizing the truth. I married down Helen. I married so far down I'm practically at sea level." The nearby tables went silent. The clinking of silver stopped. Jean-Pierre, the maitre d', froze his eyes wide, looking toward the alcove. "Mark," Helen whispered, her voice trembling. "You are making a scene." "Am I?" Mark said, a wild, reckless light in his eyes. He was enjoying the audience. "Or am I just speaking the truth? What would you know about it? Your family are probably turnip farmers from... where was it? Some godforsaken patch of dirt in Ohio." You sit there in a dress that costs more than your entire family's yearly income, and you dare to tell me to be quiet." He threw his napkin onto his plate. "Just sit there and look pretty, Helen. It's the one thing you're supposed to be good at, and you can't even manage that." The silence in the restaurant was no longer polite. It was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Helen was frozen, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, a silent statue of humiliation. Mark looked around, a king on a temporary, pathetic throne, and then a shadow fell over the table. The shadow was tall and broad. Mark, annoyed at the interruption, looked up ready to wave away another waiter. It was not a waiter. It was Antonio Romano. He stood beside their table, his hands clasped behind his back. He was not looking at Mark. His entire formidable presence was focused on Helen. His face, which had been a mask of stone earlier, was now etched with a profound, aching sadness. He looked at the tear track on her cheek, and his expression hardened. A cold, controlled fury surfaced in his dark eyes, like a glacier carving into a frozen sea. Mark, realizing who this was, scrambled to his feet. His chair screeched backward on the marble floor, a sound that cut through the silence like a scream. Mr. Romano." Mark sputtered, his face instantly slick with sweat. The bravado of 30 seconds ago evaporated, leaving behind the terrified, striving boy from Ohio. "Sir, what an honor, a true honor. I'm Mark Ellison, Sterling Price Capital. My wife and I were just enjoying this magnificent steak. Truly. My compliments to you, I guess." He let out a short, high-pitched laugh that died in his throat. Antonio Romano did not acknowledge him. He did not turn. He did not even blink. He continued to gaze at Helen, his voice low and heavy, but carrying across the silent room. It was thick with the Italian accent he never bothered to lose. "Helen," he said. Helen flinched as if struck. She slowly, agonizingly lifted her head. Her tear-filled amber eyes met her father's. "Helen," he said again, softer this time. "Figlia mia." "My daughter." He reached out a large, ringed hand and gently, almost reverently, brushed the tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Why?" he whispered, his voice cracking with a pain that silenced the entire restaurant. "Why didn't you tell me you were here? Why are you letting this verme speak to you this way?" Mark's world tilted. The blood rushed from his head, replaced by a roaring, static white noise. "Daughter figlia mia!" He looked from Antonio, the legend, the billionaire, the man who owned this city, to Helen, his mousy, simple, trailer park wife. And for the first time, he saw her. He saw the identical proud set of her jaw. He saw the same dark, intelligent, obsidian-flecked eyes. He saw the high cheekbones and the noble line of her nose. She wasn't a forgettably pretty girl. She was Helen Romano, and she was a mirror of the man standing beside her. It wasn't a nickname. It wasn't a mistake. "Papa," Helen whispered, and the word shattered the last of Mark's denial. She reached up and grasped her father's hand. Antonio Romano's gaze finally shifted to Mark. It was not the hot, explosive anger Mark might have expected. It was something far, far worse. It was the arctic, cold, dismissive gaze of a god swatting at an insect. It was the look of pure, concentrated power. "You," Antonio said. The single word was an indictment. "You are the man who married my Helen." Mark's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. He was choking on his own ambition. I... Mr. Romano. Sir. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. No. Antonio said, his voice flat. There is no misunderstanding. I have been watching. I have heard enough. I have heard everything. Mark looked around wildly. The Harrisons were staring Richard Harrison's face, a mask of utter contempt. The old couple at the next table were looking at him as if he were something they'd found on the bottom of their shoe. He was not just a guest. He was a pariah. Helen, tell him, Mark pleaded, turning to his wife. Tell him it was a joke. It was just banter. Tell him I love you. Helen looked at him, and the woman he saw was not the one he'd left the apartment with. The mousy, broken wife was gone. In her place was a woman of ice and fire. The mask of the simple girl had melted away, revealing the Romano heiress beneath. No, Mark, she said, her voice clear and strong, ringing with an authority he had never heard. No more. Antonio Romano raised one hand, a subtle gesture. Jean-Pierre, the maitre d', was instantly at his side, along with two other men. They were not waiters. They were large, impeccably dressed, and wore earpieces. They were Antonio's personal security. Jean-Pierre, Antonio said, his voice quiet but final. Bring Mr. Ellison his coat. His meal is finished. No. Mark shrieked, panic overriding his paralysis. You can't. Helen, you can't let him do this. This is my life, the Harrison account. I'll be ruined. You were ruined, Antonio said, his voice like chipped granite, the moment you raised your voice to my daughter. The two security men took Mark by the elbows. They were not rough, but their grip was non-negotiable. My steak. I didn't even... Mark stammered, his mind short-circuiting. The steak is on the house, Antonio said dismissively. Now get this thing out of my restaurant. Helen! Helen! Mark yelled as they began to walk him, then drag him towards the door. But Helen had already turned her back on him. She was crying into her father's chest, her shoulders shaking as 5 years of pain, fear, and silence finally broke free. The last thing Mark Ellison saw before he was thrown out of the bronze doors and onto the cold, unforgiving sidewalk was the sight of Antonio Romano, the king of La Sfera d'Oro, holding his daughter as if she were the only precious thing in the world. The restaurant remained hushed. Antonio led a trembling Helen away from the table, guiding her through a discreet door marked private that Mark had never even noticed. It led into a study that was more like a command center. Dark mahogany walls were lined with books. A large desk sat in the center, and one wall was a bank of security monitors, showing every angle of the dining room. Antonio sat her down on a plush leather sofa and barked a request into an intercom. Coffee. Brandy. Now. He sat opposite her, not as the titan of industry, but as a father. His face was a wreck of conflicting emotions, fury, relief, and a devastating, bottomless guilt. Why? He asked again, his voice raw. Helen, my heart, il mio cuore. Why this? Why him? Helen was quiet for a long moment, sipping the brandy a waiter had brought with silent speed. The warmth spread through her, chasing away the bone-deep chill. Because he wasn't you, Papa, she finally said, her voice small. Antonio recoiled as if she had slapped him. He wasn't you, she continued, finding her strength. He wasn't rich, he wasn't powerful, he wasn't smart. He was just a man. A normal, striving, ambitious man. And he didn't want Helen Romano. He wanted Helen Vance, a quiet girl he met in a coffee shop. This was her story. Her great escape. 5 years ago, Helen Romano had been the most coveted and most suffocated heiress in the city. Her father, made paranoid by his own wealth, saw every man as a predator, a gold digger. He was loving, but his love was a fortress. There had been David, a curator at the museum. Helen thought she loved him. He was kind, he was smart, he made her laugh. But one day her father had sat her down in this very office and presented a dossier, a file compiled by his private investigators. David was in deep gambling debt. He had been feeding information about the Romano family to a tabloid. Helen was heartbroken. It wasn't the first time. Her father had destroyed every relationship she'd ever had. "I am protecting you, Helen," he had thundered. "They don't love you. They love this." He had gestured to the restaurant, the Empire. "And how will I ever know?" she had screamed back at him. "How will I ever find someone who just loves me?" When you're standing in the way, shining a spotlight on the money. That night she had packed a bag. She accessed a small trust fund her grandmother had left her, one her father didn't control. She changed her last name to Vance, her mother's maiden name. She got a small, simple apartment, started volunteering at the animal shelter, and for the first time in her life, she was anonymous. 2 months later, Mark Ellison had sat down at her table at the daily grind. He seemed so normal. She wept, the story pouring out of her. He was stressed about his job. He complained about his car. He didn't know a thing about art, and he thought vintage just meant old. He was simple, and he liked me, the me I was pretending to be. I was so desperate to be loved for myself that I fell for the first man who didn't know my last name. But that animal! Antonio growled, the fury returning. That thing he said to you at the table, how long? It started small, Helen admitted, ashamed. A little comment about my clothes, a criticism of my friends from the shelter. Then he suggested I quit. He said it was unseemly. Then he just started chipping away at me. Papa, he called me stupid. He told me I was lucky he saved me. He isolated me, and I was too proud to come home. I was too ashamed to admit that my great escape was a failure, that I had run from your gilded cage just to lock myself in his. I thought I had made my bed. I thought I had to lie in it. Antonio's face was pale. You are a Romano. You are my blood. You are the only good thing I have ever built. And you thought I would rather you be miserable than be safe. You thought my pride was more important than you. He knelt before her, a move that would have shocked the financial world. The great Antonio Romano on his knees, he took both her hands. "Helen, I was a fool," he said, his voice thick with tears. "I was so obsessed with protecting my legacy, I forgot to protect my daughter. I drove you away. I drove you to him. I saw only the gold diggers, and I was blind to the monster. Perdonami. Forgive me." "Oh, Papa," she cried, and they held each other, a father and daughter, healing a 5-year wound in the heart of their empire. After a few minutes, Antonio's demeanor shifted. The father receded, and the CEO returned, but this time his focus was singular. He stood up and went to his desk. "This, Mark Ellison," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "He is an asset manager at Sterling Price Capital." Helen nodded. A junior manager. Antonio picked up his phone. He didn't dial. He spoke to his assistant. Get me Robert Sterling. At his home. Yes, I know it's 9 p.m. Get him. And while you're at it, get me the name of the top divorce attorney in this city, the most vicious one we have. He looked at Helen, his eyes now clear and hard. You are my daughter, Helen. You are an heiress. But more than that, you are a Romano. And we do not tolerate parasites. Mark landed hard on the granite sidewalk. The bronze doors of La Sfera d'Oro slammed shut behind him, the sound echoing in the quiet, wealthy street. For a moment he just stood there, dazed, his mind a scramble of stake stock tickers and the horrifying image of Antonio Romano's face. This isn't happening, he muttered. He straightened his $2,000 suit jacket, which was now wrinkled from the security guard's grip. This is a nightmare. He fumbled for his phone. He had to call Helen. He had to fix this. He'd apologize. He'd beg. He'd threaten her. He'd tell her. What could he possibly threaten her with? The simple poor wife was a lie. He was the simple poor one. He dialed her number. It rang once, then went to voicemail. Helen, pick up the phone. You can't just... This is insane. You call me back. You hear me? You call me back right now. He tried again. The call didn't even go through. It went straight to a "This number is not in service" recording. Blocked. A cold, sharp panic, far colder than the October night air, seized him. He looked up. The Harrisons. His career. He had to get ahead of this. He had to call his boss, explain. Something. He dialed his boss's number. Voicemail. He hailed a cab, his hands shaking so violently he could barely get his wallet out. 22nd and Park, he barked. Their apartment, his apartment. He had to get to her. She couldn't lock him out. As the cab sped through the city, his phone buzzed. A text. From his boss. Don't bother coming in tomorrow, Mark, or ever. We'll mail you your things. No. Mark whispered. No. He tried to call. The number was blocked. He tried to email. His corporate account was already deactivated. Access denied. Robert Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Price Capital, was one of Antonio Romano's oldest friends. They played golf together every Sunday. The phone call from Antonio had lasted less than 60 seconds. That was all it took to end Mark's career. He stumbled out of the cab and ran to his apartment building. The doorman, who usually greeted him with a "Good evening, Mr. Ellison," stepped in front of him, his face impassive. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ellison. I can't let you up." "What are you talking about, Charles? It's my apartment. Get out of my way." "My instructions are clear, sir. You are not to be admitted to the premises." "Instructions from who from?" "Helen. She can't do that. The lease is in my name." "The lease, sir," Charles said, his voice flat, "is on a building owned by a subsidiary of the Romano Hospitality Group. We were informed there is a new primary leaseholder, Mrs. Ellison, or rather, Miss Romano. Now please, sir, or I'll have to call the police." Mark backed away, his mind imploding. The building. He had lived here for 5 years. He'd chosen this building himself. He'd told Helen he got a great deal on it. He never knew. She had let him pretend. He looked up at the 14th floor window at his lights, his life. It was all a sham. He hadn't rescued her. She had been curating him. A black car pulled up to the curb. A man in a sharp suit, not a security guard, but a lawyer, stepped out. "Mr. Mark Ellison." "Who are you?" Mark spat. "My name is Daniel Weiss. I represent Helen Romano." He handed Mark a thick manila envelope. "You have just been served." Mark ripped it open. His eyes scanned the words. Dissolution of marriage. Restraining order. Temporary. Immediate eviction. "You can't," Mark breathed. "The assets, our accounts, my money." "What money, Mr. Ellison?" Weiss asked, his voice smooth as silk. "According to our preliminary review, your personal accounts are significantly leveraged. The credit cards you've been using are in fact part of a supplemental corporate account for the Romano Group, which your wife graciously let you believe was your own. That line of credit has been terminated." Mark's blood turned to ice. The BMW, the suits, the dinner. "There is, however," the lawyer continued, "the matter of the prenuptial agreement." Mark's heart leapt. The prenup. He had insisted on it. Mark Ellison, the finance guy, had insisted on a prenup to protect his future earnings from the simple girl with no prospects. He remembered the clause, "all assets acquired prior to the marriage, and any assets derived from familiar inheritance shall remain the sole property of the individual." He had signed it smugly, thinking he was protecting himself from her. He looked at the lawyer, a tiny, desperate shred of hope in his eyes. The lawyer smiled, a thin, cruel expression. "Ms. Romano is, of course, prepared to honor that agreement fully. She will keep her assets. And you, Mr. Ellison, may keep yours. Good evening." Daniel Weiss got back in the car and drove away, leaving Mark Ellison standing on the sidewalk holding a useless stack of papers, a man with nothing but the suit on his back and a life that had just been deleted. While Mark was imploding on the sidewalk, Helen was in her father's study, a team of lawyers and assistants moving around her. The mousy wife was gone. In her place was a CEO in waiting. She was sharp, decisive, and focused. "The apartment is secure," Daniel Weiss said, re-entering the study. "He's been served." "Good," Helen said. "And the accounts frozen." Antonio said, a dark satisfaction in his voice. "The lease on his car is terminated. His firm has let him go. He is, as of this moment, a man with no job, no car, and no home." Helen nodded, but she felt no pleasure, just a cold, empty relief. The relief of a limb being amputated to stop a spreading poison. "Papa," she said, turning to him, "what he did, he was cruel. He was a monster. But I let him be." "Helen, no," Antonio started. "Yes," she insisted. "I hid. I hid from you, I hid from my name, and I hid from myself. I let him shrink me down because I was afraid to be big. I was so afraid of being Helen Romano, the heiress, that I let him convince me I was Helen Ellison, the nothing." She stood up and walked to the window, looking down on the city lights. "He called me stupid papa for 5 years, and the woman who speaks 3 languages and has a degree in art history from Yale. I believed him." "That is what abusers do, tesoro mio," Antonio said gently. "They isolate. They diminish. It is not your fault." "It's not my fault," she agreed. "But it is my responsibility to fix it. I ran away from this." She gestured around the opulent room. "I ran away from the Romano name because I thought it was a prison, but I was wrong." She turned to face him, her eyes blazing with a new hard-won fire. "This name isn't a prison, Papa. It's a weapon, and I've let it rust. I let a man like Mark Ellison hurt me, and I had all this power at my fingertips and refused to use it. Antonio watched his daughter, his heart swelling with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. The girl who had run away was gone. A woman had returned. A queen. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to come home," she said, "but not to the guest room. I want an office. I want to work." Antonio smiled. "The Romano Foundation, the philanthropic arm, your mother. She always wanted you to run it. It's been sitting waiting for you." "The foundation," Helen said, a slow smile spreading across her face. Mark, he always hated my volunteer work. He said it was beneath me." She laughed, a real, genuine laugh. "He had no idea. He thought he was up here, and I was down there. He never realized he wasn't even in the building." She looked at her father. "I want to focus the foundation on domestic abuse, on shelters for women and children who have nowhere to run, for women who don't have a billionaire father to call." Antonio Romano put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "Then that," he said, "is what we will do. Welcome home, Helen." 6 months passed. The chill of that October night had given way to the damp, burgeoning heat of a New York spring. But Mark Ellison wasn't in New York. He was in Des Moines, Iowa. He now called himself Mark Hill. Ellison was a name so toxic it was radioactive. The story of the husband at La Sfera had become a quiet, vicious legend on Wall Street, a cautionary tale whispered over $30 cocktails. He was not just fired, he was blacklisted, excommunicated. No firm would touch him. His name was a synonym for career suicide. The lawsuits had been swift. The debts he'd hidden, the ones Helen had known about all along, were called in. The Romano legal team had advanced him the money to pay them an act he first mistook for mercy. But it was not mercy. It was a tactical move. He was no longer in debt to a dozen faceless banks. He was in debt to one entity, the Romano Group, and they were garnishing his wages. He had pawned his watch. He had sold his cufflinks. He had fled New York on a midnight bus landing in the first city that felt far enough away. His new life was a shade of beige so bleak it made his old apartment look like a carnival. He lived in a 300-square-foot studio apartment above a 24-hour laundromat. The air perpetually smelled of warm bleach and mildew, and the flashing pink and blue neon "open" sign was the only light he had after dark. He worked in a sprawling, windowless cubicle farm for a third-party logistics company. His portfolio was gone. He now managed shipping manifests. His job for 8 agonizing hours a day was to cross-reference invoices for pallets of kitty litter and paper towels. The irony was a constant, dull-edged knife in his gut. He who had mocked her for caring about stray animals now tracked the supplies for them. It was a Friday night. He was in a brightly lit, sterile supermarket called Heartland Grocers. His basket contained a single frozen lasagna, a generic brand 6-pack of beer, and a bar of soap. He was at the checkout, his eyes glazed when he saw it. On the magazine rack between Angler's Weekly and Good Housekeeping was the cover of Forbes, and on the cover was Helen. He stopped breathing. It wasn't the mousy, quiet woman he had bullied. It wasn't the terrified girl in the black dress. The woman on the cover was a stranger. Her dark hair was cut in a severe, stylish, and impossibly chic bob. She was wearing a crimson suit that looked like it had been sculpted from a block of pure, confident power. Her amber eyes, once downcast, now stared directly into the camera, and they were not just intelligent. They were dangerous. He snatched the magazine, his hands trembling. The headline blazed in bold white letters. The New Face of Philanthropy. Helen Romano. How the heiress reclaimed her name and built a new empire of hope. He stumbled out of the line, leaving his basket behind, and tore the magazine open. The article was a 10-page spread. It detailed the Helen's Haven initiative. In just 6 months, she had leveraged her father's capital and her own ferocious intelligence to build and open 3 state-of-the-art women's shelters, with 2 more under construction. She hadn't just thrown money at a problem. She had rebuilt the entire system from the ground up, incorporating legal aid job training and psychological counseling. He read a quote from the mayor of New York. Helen Romano doesn't just ask for change. She arrives with a binder, a team of lawyers, and a non-negotiable timeline. She's the most effective force in this city. He kept reading, his blood turning to ice. Many were surprised by Ms. Romano's sudden aggressive entry into the public sphere, the article read. For years, she was famously private, dedicating her time to anonymous volunteer work at local animal shelters. Then came the paragraph that stopped his heart. Ms. Romano is herself a survivor. Her new passion, friends say, was forged in the fires of a brief, unfortunate first marriage to a man who, sources say, spectacularly and publicly underestimated his wife. When asked about this difficult period, Ms. Romano is diplomatic but clear. We often think of abuse as something physical, she told us from her Park Avenue office. But the most insidious kind is the one that convinces you that you are worthless. It's the voice that tells you you're stupid, that you're less. My new mission is to give women their voices back and to silence the voice that tells them to stay small. The article didn't even mention his name. He wasn't a person. He wasn't a villain. He was an experience, an it, a voice. He was a footnote, a catalyst, a bad memory she had already metabolized into rocket fuel. He dropped the magazine onto the linoleum floor. The unfortunate first marriage, the experience. He had spent 5 years trying to climb a ladder to be someone. He had clawed his way into La Sfera d'Oro, the pinnacle of his world, only to find out the mousy, worthless girl he'd been kicking at his feet had owned the entire mountain. He stumbled out of the store, the cold, damp air hitting his face. He didn't just lose a wife. He didn't just lose a job. He had been holding the winning lottery ticket for the entire world, and he had set it on fire just to watch it burn. He finally understood Antonio Romano's final word, to him verme, worm. He had been a parasite, and the host had finally and calmly brushed him off. Miles away in her new corner office, overlooking Central Park, Helen Romano finished a presentation. The Helen's Haven project was officially going national. The boardroom was filled with lawyers, city planners, and investors, all of whom hung on her every word. The projections are clear, she said, her voice crisp and commanding, echoing in the quiet room. Phase 2 will see us breaking ground in Chicago and Los Angeles by the 4th quarter. I want the legal framework finalized by June. Questions? A hand went up. Ms. Romano, the timeline is aggressive. Helen smiled. It was a small, sharp, confident expression. Aggression is what's required. These women don't have time for us to be polite. We get this done. Next. Her father Antonio sat at the far end of the table. He was not Papa. He was Mr. Romano, a board member. And he was beaming. He watched his daughter command the room, a woman reborn. This was his legacy. Not the steel and glass, but the fire and will he saw in his daughter's eyes. The meeting adjourned. The room emptied, leaving just Helen and Antonio. "You were good, figlia mia," he said, walking over. "No, you were better than good. You were—" "I was better than you," Helen teased, packing her briefcase. "You would have yelled. I just used the data." He laughed, a full, genuine sound. "This is what you were made for, Helen. Not that." He didn't have to say Mark's name. Helen paused, zipping the bag. She looked out the window at the city spread out below her, a kingdom she had once run from, and now intended to rule. "He did one good thing for me, Papa," she said quietly. "He did nothing." "No, he did," she insisted, turning to face him. "He spent 5 years trying to make me Saul. He tried to break me down, to make me into nothing." She picked up her briefcase, her posture perfect. "He failed, and in doing so he showed me exactly how strong I am. You can't know you're unbreakable until someone tries to break you." She kissed her father on the cheek. "I have another meeting. Don't wait up." He watched her walk out. She was no longer Helen Vance, the runaway. She was no longer Helen Ellison, the victim. She was Helen Romano, the head of the Romano Foundation. And she was just getting started. The fall of Mark Ellison was as swift as it was complete, a perfect example of what happens when arrogance meets a truth it cannot comprehend. And the rise of Helen Romano is a powerful lesson. Sometimes the quietest person in the room holds all the power. She didn't need a prince to save her. She just needed to remember she was already a queen. What did you think of Mark's devastating, career-ending mistake? Do you think Helen should have revealed her secret to him sooner, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let us know all your thoughts in the comments section below. We read every single one. If you love stories about secret identities, shocking twists and righteous justice, please show your support by hitting that like button. It really helps the channel. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit share and subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another unforgettable story. Thank you for listening.